Sata Parajaka Jatika Dese Tu Dhammam Anukampi Manpajam.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So this evening I'd like to try to bring the teaching of the Buddhas on the fueling or feeding of the hindrances and the enlightenment factors and the starving of them to a practical level of how we work with those factors. I decided not to post the whole sutta for you because I'd rather discourage too much thinking, and I think together contemplating somewhat what the experience is of dealing with these hindrances and cultivating the factors from this perspective of what are the qualities that cause the hindrances to come up, to arise and to increase and grow, and what causes the hindrances to decrease. And disappear. And the same with the awakening factors. So that page out there in the foyer has the same thing that I'm going to be speaking from, and you can take a look at the specific parts of it that relate to what you're experiencing. Hopefully that'll help. So the Buddha starts by asking a question: what fuels the arising of the hindrance of sensual desire? Or when it has arisen, makes it increase and grow? And he said that what causes sensual desire to arise and to increase and grow is attention on the feature of beauty. So something we're really attracted to. And that it's careless attention. We're not observing this thing that's beautiful or attractive to us from a place of understanding, from a place of Dhamma, but from a place of desire and the sense of self. So for a moment, just think about maybe a time, or if this feels appropriate to you, to your experience, an instance when there is strong sensual desire. And what was it that triggered it? I can think of an instance for myself, a pretty surprising one. is catching sight of something on the internet that really inflamed some lust. It's very rare for me. In the past, I did a lot of renunciation work with that particular ordinary human reaction. And it was really, really helpful and brought a tremendous amount of peace and relief. And so I can understand this, what the Buddha is saying. It's like if we see something that strikes a chord in us, doesn't have to be lust, it could be just a desire for food or entertainment or whatever it is that satisfies that longing for some kind of sensual experience. And then how does it, what do you do? So living in the world as an ordinary person, you might want to continue to kind of fan the flame, because we're very encouraged to seek our happiness and enjoyment from a worldly perspective. But when we are immersing ourselves in the Dhamma, we can start to see what a trap that is. So I think a first step is knowing that where we want to put our attention and where we want to have getting enough experience to know that it's much more wonderful to have a peaceful mind and heart, and to be able to see reality as it is, than it is to follow these cravings for sensual pleasure. So when something like this happens, then of course what the Buddha is saying is, if you give careless, unwise attention frequently, observing this provocative thing or evocative, and then really digging our way in deeper. But when we look at what the Buddha recommends for helping that arisen sensual desire to decrease, to starve it, it's to have frequent wise attention or careful attention on the opposite, on the feature of ugliness. And in the example that I was talking about, that did help. It really does work. But there are times when I think we don't really have to go that far. If we're craving a taste, for example, or something like that, maybe it's not quite so strong. We can just practice renunciation. If we want to overcome that, we can just practice staying away from it for a while. We don't really have to do too much around, somehow coming up with some idea of what's ugly. Let's say you really have a craving for sweets. I know someone who's diabetic, that's a real problem for her. It is, she can reflect on the ugliness of what happens to her body when she indulges in that, and how hard it is to control her blood sugar and what might happen over time. So that's one example of how we can look at the downside, basically. So that's probably pretty straightforward. this idea of wise attention and unwise or careless attention is important. You probably, most of you know about the Pali. We chant it every day for the meal. Yoniso manasikara. Yoniso manasikara is the opposite. The unwise, the careless attention. And to really think about what that is. How do you do that? How do you wisely attend to something? How do you carelessly attend to something? The careless attention is you just take it in. You don't reflect on what it means. You let yourself be sucked into watching something on YouTube that isn't good for you to watch, or whatever media, filling the mind with a lot of things. News, that's probably not, it's not going to bring up sensual desire, but it might bring up ill will. So careless attention is just letting yourself be subjected to whatever it is without reflection, without understanding how it impacts the mind and how important it is to protect the mind. And I'll say more about that because it doesn't mean that we just shut everything out either. So the way of responding to ill will, aversion, the negative side, is the opposite of what it is for sensual desire. What brings it up? Frequent, unwise attention or careless attention to the feature of repulsion. It's important to think of, for you, when does ill will or aversion arise? I know ill will doesn't really capture it for some of us because we never really wish ill will on someone. But maybe aversion, the negativity that can consume the mind. So think of one thing that can bring that up. And then what caused it? What is it? What is that one thing? And then if you continue to subject yourself to that, take that in, does it build up the fire of anger or aversion? And then how do you calm it? Well, the Buddha said you starve the ill will by wisely reflecting on the heart's release by loving kindness. So it's not just turning away from the influence or the sensory input, but to really bring up not just loving kindness itself, but how much the heart is relieved, the heart's release. It really is related to wisdom. You really, through loving kindness, can realize the truth of Nibbana, taking it all the way. And it's something that, is generally an episodic thing. It's not the full awakening. But to have that experience of that relief coming to the heart by paying wise attention to that experience. And do you think it's possible for you to make a decision when the ill will is there to really shift and immerse yourself so fully in loving kindness that your entire mental state turns around and you can really feel that release, that loving kindness through your whole system? And with dullness and drowsiness, the careless attention, and this would be a frequent careless attention to discontent, sloth, yawning, sleepiness after eating, and mental sluggishness. And so what's interesting about this is we might experience those things, but when we carelessly engage in them and we don't take care of ourselves in this, then we will be fueling that or feeding that hindrance of dullness and drowsiness. One time I went through a period when I was an anagarika of having a lot of drowsiness, especially anytime I sat down to meditate, I would just immediately fall asleep. And it happened that I was in the presence of a very psychic monk. It was pretty big. There was a considerable crowd of people there, and people were asking questions, and I had this question, and I let him know I had a question, but he ignored me. And my question was, how do I work with this? It's so strong. And he didn't ask me about my question, but then a few minutes later he answered my question without looking at me. He just out of nowhere started talking about this drowsiness, sleepiness, and he said, you have to be happy, then you won't be sleepy anymore. You won't be drowsy. You won't fall asleep when you sit down to meditate. At the time, the situation I was living in, I thought, I don't know how I can be happy in this situation. So that's a good clue of figuring out a way to go somewhere else. If you can, do something about your life. So I think happiness does have a lot to do with it in certain cases. As I've said before, of course, we do need to take care of the body, and sometimes we're just tired because we haven't been able to really rest enough. And so to know that and to be kind and taking care. But if this is an ongoing problem, then it's good to look at, well, what are the specific causes for this to arise? And how do I have that careful, wise attention to it? So what the Buddha says here about how to starve this hindrance is to have frequent, wise attention to the elements of initiative, persistence, and exertion. So how to get started, being energetic, how to get started with something, how to stick with it, and the amount of effort you put into it. So a lot of times it's helpful for that to be a physical activity. And this is what I think is valuable, or many things valuable about the monastic schedule, but in the Ajahn Chah tradition specifically, get up early in the morning and you have your chanting and meditation, and as soon as that's over, you dig into chores and activities, and it's intended to be rousing. It's intended to really help you bring up energy. And of course, it's really helpful when you're in a situation where everybody's doing the same thing. The energy of the group can kind of help you along to really dig in. But these are the things to reflect on for yourself in your own situation. What can I do to bring up energy? What can I do to dig into something? I remember when I was in high school, I had one class that I really, really enjoyed. And so I'd wake up in the morning, I'd think about that class, and it's I want to really get up, get moving, get to school. And so if there are things that we can use like that, if we're having difficulty with dullness and drowsiness, and it's important to notice that this is the same thing the Buddha is saying is what helps us to develop that awakening factor of energy. It's the same thing, frequent, careful attention, wise attention to the elements of initiative, persistence, and exertion. And it will really cut into any dullness and drowsiness and really develop that factor of awakening. And then when the Buddha comes to the hindrance of doubt, you see a blank. I don't know if you took a look at the sheet, but he says, there are these things that cause doubt. And if you pay frequent, careless, or unwise attention to those things, then you can have trouble with doubt. But he doesn't specify what those things are. And that's true in some other places through here too. And my sense is that that's because it's different, maybe different in different situations. So when doubt arises for you, can you think of a time and can you see what the cause was? And what does doubt feel like to you? Is it a problem? I think I mentioned at some point that doubt is often caused by thinking too much. It's we're ruminating over something and the mind kind of spins these things that get us wondering, am I doing this right or not, and so on. So it's useful to reflect on this. If doubt arises, we can look at, what kicked that off and what keeps it going? But fortunately, in the starving category, we have clear instruction. So regardless of how it came about, we do want to know how these things come about, because we all have conditioning, we all have patterns. And if we can understand those patterns, we can change them. Because that's what wise attention is, where you're seeing what is the cause and what can I do to reprogram the mind. So with doubt, when we're starving it, it's about frequent, wise attention to qualities that are skillful and unskillful, blameworthy and blameless, inferior and superior, and those on the side of dark and bright. That's the same description as what it is that helps the arising and developing of the investigation of Dhamma. So basically, when there's doubt, investigate Dhamma. And that investigation can include the kinds of things we've been talking about, contemplation, investigating, or talking to a teacher, or finding, getting some kind of help or answers from someone, learning and finding the opportunity to ask questions. So that's basically the range of how to work with the hindrances. Now let's consider the factors of enlightenment. And the Buddha talks about what fuels them first. And with mindfulness, there's another one of those blanks. He says there are things that, if you give them careful and wise attention, that will cause mindfulness to arise, and when it's arisen, fully develop it. And he doesn't say what those things are. But you probably already know for yourself what they are. What causes you to become mindful? Well, one thing for sure is like being involved in activities with other people where you're actually sitting down and purposely bringing mindfulness to the fore of your mind and experience, and then there can be other other cues that we have, like when maybe when we're doing certain things, maybe we train ourselves to be mindful when we're doing certain activities, and we remember that. We develop patterns to remind ourselves of mindfulness. That careful, wise attention. So that's something that's important to reflect on a bit. What helps my mindfulness develop? And some of the things we've been talking about, like when we have some kind of triggering emotional experience, using mindfulness to work with it. Really this idea of the Buddha saying that it's so important, a vital condition for the development of enlightenment factors to have good friends. And that includes, listening to the Dhamma talks of highly attained people, and really taking in the Dhamma, being able to discuss it, and probably everything in that list we looked at a couple of days ago would serve as a support to the development of mindfulness. And of course, it's pretty straightforward to look at the factor that starves mindfulness. It's not frequently paying attention to those things. So we, neglect our practice, neglect our, don't pick up on the opportunities to listen to Dhamma or discuss it, that kind of thing. I think most of you are unlikely to go that direction at this point in your practice. So the mindfulness will continue to build, particularly if we have some experiences where we're really able to unlock something heavy that we've been carrying for a long time. We can really be able to look at those things that that have been really painful, that we've been burdened by. And when we use mindfulness and clear comprehension and wise reflection to be able to see through them, to deal with the feeling that arises in the body and to be able to stay with it until it ends, or gain some insight by having this kind of wise attention on that experience, that really is encouraging to keep going. That more and more of that becomes part of your experience, ongoing experience in the practice. So when we looked at doubt, we already looked at what the Buddha said encourages or fuels the investigation of Dhamma. It's evaluating the skillful and unskillful qualities, those that are blameworthy and blameless, inferior and superior, and those that are on the side of dark or bright. What's wholesome and unwholesome. And we know through the teachings this list of 10 things that are wholesome and unwholesome, the 10 unwholesome things that have their opposite. On the wholesome side, it's unwholesome to kill living beings. The wholesome side, of course, is avoiding that. And the other moral precepts of avoiding taking what's not given, avoiding lying, and the expansion into avoiding malicious speech, divisive speech, harsh speech, gossip. And then ill will is unwholesome and goodwill is wholesome, and longing, they use longing there instead of sensual desire, but longing, and the overcoming of that. And then wrong view and right view. So when we see this in our experience, and we can identify, oh, this mental habit is unwholesome, then what do? I really want to encourage again to bring some kindness to it, because there are always causes for these things to be part of our, our karma, our karmic experience. And so when we're kind and gentle, but also clear and firm, and we see that there's an unwholesome pattern, then we have an opportunity to really, investigate that. Understand what causes that to arise and how it can be starved. As we engage in the investigation of Dhamma, through those evaluations and also through just working with whatever mental state is present in the present moment, we're increasing our skill in it, and we're developing that factor. And of course, we're starving the factor of investigation of Dhamma when we do not frequently pay attention to these qualities of skillful and unskillful, etc. And as we noticed before when we talked about overcoming dullness and drowsiness, energy, the Buddha talks about the initiative, the persistence, and the exertion. And when we frequently, wisely observe this, pay attention to it, and develop it, then we're developing the enlightenment factor of energy. And when we do not frequently pay attention, we're starving it. So every day we can notice times when we take the initiative to dig into something, when we're applying ourselves and sticking with something, and how much energy, effort we're putting into it. And we can recognize that this happens all the time, just taking care of ordinary business. It's like, how do we go about it? Are we going to go about it kind of in a lazy, kind of sloppy way? Or are we going to go about it with attention and some appropriate effort? And when it comes to joy, piti, we have another one of those blanks. He says there are those things that bring up piti and help it develop. And if we give those frequent, wise attention, then we'll be, developing that factor of enlightenment. And if we do not pay frequent attention to those things, we'll starve that factor of enlightenment. So for you, first of all, having some idea of what falls into the category of piti is useful. I think the most general expression of it that I've had so far is to think of it as spiritual energy, a happy spiritual feeling. You can call it joy. The translation of rapture, I think, is a little bit intimidating for some people. It feels like it has to be something so intense and amazing. It can be very intense, but it can also be pretty subtle sometimes, at least when you start out. But then putting our attention on it really helps it to develop. So even if it's kind of light, felt sense, bringing your attention to it helps it to strengthen and develop. The more joy comes. And I also feel like experiencing joy in the practice is closely related to how relaxed we are. To really allow ourselves to practice without pressure. When we want to get something, we want to get somewhere, when we have these thoughts of, I'm not really making much progress in my practice, and I'm not really, these negative kinds of reflections, it's something to work with. You can put that in the category of ill will, a hindrance of ill will. And instead, if we can encourage ourselves to relax more into the practice and enjoy ourselves, make it fun. What is it like to have fun meditating? Have fun doing walking meditation or just being present with what's here and now. We're so goal-driven in our society. We're so encouraged to beat ourselves up. We want to learn how to reprogram those patterns and give ourselves a lot of encouragement. Now, for some of you, it's probably pretty consistent, maybe, that some amount of piti or joy arises in your meditation practice. Or you might go through a period where that's not happening, and maybe it used to happen more. It's very important to not get bogged down by those changes and to reflect on, okay, what are those things that encourage joy to arise and help maintain it if it arises? And how can I pay more attention to those things? And it might even be something that you didn't really relate to meditation in previous reflections. Like maybe it's something that happens in your life, some mental process. I remember realizing once when I was living in England that if I went through a period of my mind being very judgmental of myself and kind of beating myself up, about 24 hours later, I would have an experience of getting grumpy with somebody else. It's pretty consistent. And you know, that seems like, well, what does that got to do with PT? But it has a lot to do with it. Because if that's what's going on in the mind, that kind of thing, we're really undercutting our ability to be at ease and tranquil and happy and open to whatever the experience of this meditation is going to be. If we can take more of that attitude, we're going to be more likely really enjoy the practice, and more joy comes out of the practice. That's my theory. But I think for any of us, observing for ourselves those things that when we attend to them help to bring more joy into our practice, that's going to be what's helpful to us. Another thing I've really found helpful around this is the Qigong practice. So I hope you enjoyed that today. And I know I afterwards I could really notice the difference. I haven't done it in a while, and it was really helpful. So we'll try to continue to do some of that at that 2:00 meeting. And I kept talking while we were doing the practice about feeling the energy, and maybe you don't feel anything, and that's totally okay. You still have energy. Whether you have that sensitivity or not isn't really the point. But I do think that opening up of the system, the body system, can have a bearing on the joy in our meditation. So that's another area for you to investigate. And how about tranquility? When the Buddha says we pay attention to tranquility in the body and tranquility in the mind, And that if we do that with wise attention, then that helps to make the factor of tranquility arise, the awakening factor arise, and fully develop it. And of course, the starving of it is by not frequently paying attention to the tranquility of the body and tranquility of the mind. So do you have a sense right now of what it's like when your body is tranquil? And what happens even when I say that? Is it likely that the body becomes a little bit more tranquil? And how about the tranquility of the mind? You know, it's not like it's some big attainment. It's just, you know, very likely to be the case when you're practicing meditation day after day, relieved of the ordinary duties of your life. And of course, it happens when you have your ordinary duties. How much does our wise attention to our ordinary duties help bring tranquility? Even the intention to be tranquil can help more of that become apparent to us. The Buddha says that the way to fuel the arising of the awakening factor of samadhi is by paying wise attention to the things that are the basis for serenity and freedom from distraction. Now again, I think some investigation there about what are those things that really provide a basis for serenity and being free from distraction. And of course, the starving comes from not frequently paying attention to those things. And for equanimity, another open space for us to reflect, what is it that helps equanimity to arise and to become fulfilled, fully developed? Can I pay careful and wise attention to those things? So we're going to have a chance over the next 10 days to reflect on these individual awakening factors. And this is just, you know, this sound, if you take this as an assignment, that might be a little too much. You know, it's like, just remember that as you're practicing and various things arise, that you can think about it in this way. You know, what are the causes? What are the causes that brought this about, or what are the causes that could bring about, if it's a hindrance, it's diminishment. If it's an awakening factor, it's encouragement. And we'll talk about other ways in which these things are related. You know, like the fact that when we're drowsy, that's the best time to try to practice the energizing awakening factors, like investigation of Dhamma and bringing up more energy and more PT. It really helps us to brighten up. But if we're restless, then we want to avoid those energizing factors and instead practice tranquility and samadhi and equanimity. There's all kinds of things that we engage in the mind that are roadblocks to our progress, and we want to wisely attend to those, like the ways in which we might discourage ourselves or think, oh, this is, it's too much to expect that I'm going to experience equanimity or something like that. Instead, think more about being in this present moment and how all of it is really available to us here and now. That we have the opportunity to identify those roadblocks and remove them. We really can free the heart through our friendships, through our persistence, through our taking in the Dhamma, through our investigation, through our experience of the Brahmaviharas, through our ability to relax into altered states of peace and joy. So I hope this is useful. Like I said, notice what's happening to you in the present moment when you're practicing. And based on what's happening, you may already know what the best way is to deal with it. And if not, maybe take a look at this list on the wall and see if there's some clue about how you might approach what's going on. And you're always welcome to ask questions. I hope that was useful and not just too much information.
Anandamayang Dhammakataya Sadhukarang